I realized I should have released this video on the 1st, seeing as how I have this, and a day's already gone by, but whatever. Happy New Year, everyone. This is Hobbyist here, and 2022 has been a crazy year for me, especially when it comes to now fully diving into anime and manga. I want to say 2 years ago was when I really started picking it up again in my older years. Of course, you have always those childhood stuff of like your Pokemons of the world, your Yu-Gi-Ohs of the world, your Dragon Ball Z's, but like you're not an avid anime watcher. You're not an avid manga reader at that age because, at least for me, I was too young to really comprehend anything. But now that I've kind of dove into it more full time, I just want to go into a top 10 of both anime and manga. And I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to do a top 5 for my anime of 2022 that I watched. And then I'm going to do a top 5 of the manga that I've read. And then I'm going to kind of move forward in regards to what it is that you guys can start expecting to see when it comes to reviews for the rest of 2023. So, if you haven't yet already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that like button and notification icon. Just so that way you guys can keep staying up to date with all the reviews I have, because I would love to discuss everything with you guys in the comments below about your favorite parts of certain series and just kind of get a discussion going. But other than that, let's move forward. Going into my anime in number 5, I've got Mob Psycho 100. I think the first season of Mob Psycho was honestly pretty cool. I think the telekinesis and the psychic powers and ghosts were all very well done. I think the fight scenes are pretty fire. And I think it's honestly just an enjoyable show altogether. All the characters, the zaniness of it all, and the way that the art style betrays itself. I think it's a good introductory anime for anyone who's interested and who isn't turned off by art style. At number 4, I have Your Lie in April. Not gonna lie, I'm generally not interested in romance, as I think sometimes it's a little sappy, cheesy, and cliche. But this was the first one that kind of like gravitated towards more, primarily because the relationship with Kosai and Kaori was super deep and super well written, and kind of just related to the whole music aspect, because I always believe that music can talk to you in ways that like words can't. Just how like a picture can be worth 1,000 words. It's a beautiful art form, and I just loved how, in addition to the visual storytelling that was happening, there was also an auditory storytelling that was happening with the way that the pieces were played, the tones, the styles, everything. It was just super well done. The only thing I didn't approve of, though, was the love triangle, because it felt a little cliche, and it wasn't super strong, as the narrative already was naturally one sided from the get go, at least in my opinion. At number 3, I got Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. This show was the only one that I have on my Anime List account that I rated a 10 out of 10, primarily because of the fact that I did not see any problems. I did not have any personal gripes or any nitpicks that I could find in my own viewings that I hated about the show. I think that Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood does everything right. It perfectly balances comedy and wholesome moments with levels of sadness, and it can be surprisingly dark at times. And just the fact that the homunculi were more human than they wanted to admit, and all the various things that Full Metal Alchemist had done. If you guys want to check out my review, honestly, it did a fantastic job with what it was doing. At my number 2, I've got One Punch Man Season 1. I am not gonna lie. I knew about Saitama just from media and the internet and memes and stuff, but I didn't think One Punch Man would be as good as it was. The first thing that I noticed about One Punch Man is that it literally plays on anime and superhero tropes. The fact that heroes have tragic backstories, and that they rise up and become the symbols of hope, that doesn't apply to Saitama. Saitama wants to be a superhero because he thinks it's fun. And how generally, at least from an American side of things, at least for me, when it comes to everything that I've learned when it comes with writing, you generally don't want to write an overpowered character because they're the least interesting. Saitama is the prime example of an overpowered character who does not follow this rule. In fact, I'd say that Saitama is probably one of the more interesting characters because he is overpowered. His whole premise is that he is the overpowered character inside of his universe. He is the strongest character in his universe. And how he is simply trying to find his purpose in life because he is so strong. Honestly, it really creates a different dynamic of what you're trying to look for. And the action doesn't drag out. It's a spectacle to watch while it happens, but generally, if a fight ends quick, it's just, it ends, clean up shop, and move on. It's just as simple as that. It's super refreshing when you find an anime that's aware of itself and aware of the tropes that it would generally fall in, and is able to creatively spin them on their heads. It makes it super unique. So I I gush a lot about One Punch Man and Saitama, especially because it does all of these things that are against the grain for anime and manga. Inside of my honorable mentions, before I reveal my number one, I've got Hunter x Hunter. Right now, I've currently concluded the Heaven's Arena arc, and if I'm just comparing the first two arcs of Hunter x Hunter, the Hunter's Exam and the Heaven's Arena arc, Hunter's Exam is kind of okay, at least for me. The exam arc felt kind of predictable and that the main characters were going to win. But the Heaven's Arena arc, however, was very different because, of course, you got to the very end. We were learning about the Nen system that's inside of Hunter x Hunter. But then, even despite all of that, generally, all this training that happens for the main character inside of shonen anime in particular, they generally overcome the obstacle and triumph over the villain. Well, Gon, when he fights Sokka, actually loses. And it's not a dramatic loss either. Because generally, sometimes when it's like a dramatic loss, they'll do that triple take of the same frame that happens over and over again. And then, like, Gon would fall to the ground in slow motion. No. Hunter x Hunter got straight to the point. Ahsoka hit Gon, and he lost. Just like that. No dramatics, no theatrical anything. It was just clean your hands off, and that's it. That's the end of a Heaven's Arena fight between the two of them. So I was kind of taken aback at that approach when it came to the fight. So I'm starting to now believe that Hunter x Hunter is trying to lure me into a sense of this is a shonen anime. You think you know what's going to happen. We're going to try to lure you into the fact that you generally know these tropes and cliches, but we're going to flip it on its head. And I honestly can't wait to see what comes ahead, especially going into the York New arc, going into 2023. And now, going into the number one anime spot, my top favorite anime that I had watched in the entire year of 2022 goes to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stone Ocean. Now, originally, I had watched the animes for parts 1 through 5, but I honestly couldn't get enough of JoJo's. I fell in love with the series, so the only reasonable thing to do, because parts 6 through 8 didn't exist at the time, latter of which doesn't exist right now, I read the manga. I read the manga for Stone Ocean all the way to the end, kept going, and read Steel Ball Run. Then I read JoJolion, and I fell in love with the series. So when I heard that Netflix was finally adapting part 6, I was excited. It had been a couple of years since I had read part 6. I knew most of the big plot points that were happening, but I decided to watch it with a couple of friends who are also JoJo fans who had only been anime only. So it was an exciting experience to kind of see things from their perspective because they haven't read the manga or the source material, so they had no idea what was going to transpire. And I'll say this again, Enrico Pucci and Dio became my favorite JoJo villains because of Part 6, because of the themes of fate and gravity and the heaven plan, the whole ideas of heaven. That is what intrigued me the most. That's what pulled me towards Storm Ocean. And to me, what made it my favorite part in the originals of 1 through 6, because it had a deep philosophy, because it had a deep thought process that when Poochie actually beat everybody, it was a bittersweet ending. The fact that the anime chose to use Roundabout for the music that started JoJo's endings and then is now ending JoJo just kind of seemed like poetic justice, if you ask me. So, yeah, when it comes to anime, Stone Ocean easily leads the top for me. Now, I'm going to be switching over from my top 5 of anime to manga. Because when it comes to manga, there's a lot of things that you don't get from the anime that I enjoy a lot. Specifically within the big three of Bleach, Naruto, and One Piece, with the fact that there is no filler in manga. So, the story that you're reading is from the creator himself, and you get no interruptions or stalling or anything like that. You can just read the story from beginning to end. One Piece case may not ever end. But now I'm going to go into my top 5 of manga that I read in 2022. And at my number 5, I've got JoJolion. As you probably guys already know, I'm a pretty big JoJo fan. So getting to part 8 was very interesting. First thing that you notice is that the stand fight dynamics is completely different from before. Generally, when it comes to stand fights, especially since when Stardust Crusaders first started coming out, that generally its mysterious ability happens, we figure out what the stand does and its weakness, and then we go find the user and beat him up. And then that's the end of the fight. In JoJolion, however, while most of this remains true, the biggest difference is now it's a battle of psychological warfare. So where now, okay, I know that, just giving an example of a stand, that Silver Chariot only has the ability to fire off his sword one time, and that if it misses, he's screwed. So now the strategy would then become, if Silver Chariot's faster than I am, if Silver Chariot is especially faster without his armor, and he's incredibly skilled with his sword, how can I force Silver Chariot to then shoot his sword, get him into that last resort to shoot his sword, but to also miss to where he becomes completely helpless against my stand, who may not be as particularly fast, but can also be incredibly strong. To where it's not as easy as just punching your way out, like Star Platinum could. Or the fact that Star Platinum can stop time, you could just stop time, beat him up, and end the fight. Now it's a psychological warfare battle of, okay, what moves can I do to force Polnareff to shoot his sword at me, miss, and then now I have the ability to take him out. It's that level of thinking in the entirety of JoJolion. To where Stan might have a very obvious weakness. It might not have a very obvious weakness, but how do you pull that weakness in the forefront? How do you make the user expose that weakness and suffer the consequences because of it? And that's what makes JoJolion very interesting. Because, just as another example, Wonder of You is practically invincible. However, the way that Wonder of You works specifically is that calamity only ensues whenever you think of pursuing or are pursuing the head doctor. If you aren't, or if the head doctor is trying to pursue you, calamity does not take effect. Therefore, there is a weakness inside of Wonder of You. Also, that's specifically excluding Go Beyond with Soft and Wet and how Spin can bypass Calamity. Aside from that, the whole psychological element of how can I go on the offensive without being the one to intentionally go after the head doctor, go after Toru? Well, Josuke had a plan of trying to stick traps everywhere because technically lighting traps and having the traps activate to hurt Wonderview or hurt Toru isn't technically going after him, isn't the intent of going after him. It's just something that happens. Therefore, if we can force the head doctor to come after us, Wonderview cannot be in effect, and then maybe we can get Toru with something. It doesn't work as it all falls apart with Doggy Style, but it's that level of thinking that makes Joe Julian very cool. I will say it runs into similar problems that Part 4 had with its level of pacing, but other than that, that's why it's in my top 5. With these next couple of entries on my top 5 list, it's going to be a lot of My Hero stuff. Because if I'm being 100% honest, the Tartarus Escapees arc remains one of the best arcs inside of My Hero. Simply because of the fact that, due to the fact that this takes place after the events of the Paranormal Liberation War arc, this arc drastically shifts the tone of My Hero. Generally, you go into My Hero thinking that you're going to get a cheerful anime to where Deku becomes the number one hero, villains are just evil for the sake of being villains, when in all actuality, there's actually a flawed and broken system. And the fact that the villains have their own goals and dreams, and the fact that in My Hero, you get to know the villains just as much as you know Class 1A, Class 1B, everyone in UA, the pro heroes. You get to learn that same level of depth, especially in My Villain Academia. And when the villains finally get their message across inside the Paranormal Liberation War arc, now is the consequences that Deku has to face. Now Deku has to face it alone. Inside this picture, this is Vigilante Deku. It's probably the scariest looking he's ever been, but to me, most badass looking he's ever been. And when we get to the end of the Tartarus Escapees arc, when Deku tries to shun away his classmates, but it ends up being Deku versus Class 1A, his moment with Bakugo, as much as people might have their gripes with Bakugo, Bakugo takes that first step in admitting that he was wrong. He takes the first step that bullying wasn't necessary. Obviously, when it comes to bullying, it's not super forgivable, especially for the amount of years of trauma that Bakugo has caused for Deku, but I always felt that with Bakugo, it's at least a very important first step. If you don't recognize what you're doing is wrong, and that you are really screwing somebody else over, you'll never be able to change your behaviors. Whereas with Bakugo, he's now realizing the error of his ways. He's realizing the insecurities that he had, and he's finally openly admitting them, so that way he can now begin his healing process. Begin to amending the wrongs that he has committed. Again, I'm saying this right now, Bakugo isn't there yet, but this arc proves that he has taken that very important first step, which is acknowledging the problem. At number 3, I have the arc that precedes the Tartarus Escapees arc, the Paranormal Liberation War arc. I strongly and firmly believe that the Paranormal Liberation War arc is the best arc in My Hero, and is easily one of the best war arcs of all time. And hear me out as I explain why. Prior to this conflict, we build up both sides. My Villain Academia did huge amounts of development for the villains. We got to see dimensions of the villains and the way that they were able to grow, like with Twice's ability to overcome his mental crisis, to be able to use Sadman's Parade. Toga kind of accepting who she is, and Shigaraki uncovering his past so that way he can fully awaken and become the leader that he was always meant to be, because of the influences of Stain and Overhaul kind of really being tested and tried against the Paranormal Liberation War front. and being able to become that leader to kind of unite people under a message. Again, to me, I've never seen a villain develop like that, and it really comes to a head because we know what the heroes are fighting for. The heroes are fighting to kind of prove the villains wrong, whereas the villains are fighting to expose the system. There's personal dynamics and chemistries between each of the villains and the heroes, to where you don't want either side to really die. To where when Twice does die at the hands of Hawks, it's devastating because we have that connection with Twice. When Lady Midnight dies, we might have that connection to her. When Dabi right here reveals that he's Toya Todoroki, it's confirmed years of theories and theorization, and it's a big, and it's probably the biggest play that the villains have inside of this arc. There's so many things that happen for character development on both sides of the conflict, and so many big moments that happen on both sides of the conflict, to where it really does feel like a war that's worth fighting. It's honestly, like I said, one of the best war arcs I've ever seen. It is the best arc in My Hero Academia, if you ask me. At my number 2, I've got Berserk's Black Swordsman arc. A lot of people hate this arc because initially you see Guts as a very shallow character. But as I mentioned in that video, that's the whole point, is to kind of make you assume that this is the way that Guts is, that this is who Guts' personality is. And when you get to that last page of him shedding a tear, and you go into the Golden Age arc and you learn everything, all the complexities and intricacies of Guts' character and why he is the way he is, you understand him on a such deeper level to where you, once you have all the knowledge that you have from the Golden Age arc, then you can kind of see things from a different perspective, see any anguishing moments or any of his sadistic stuff, especially with the way that Miura drew his expressions. Sometimes you can see conflict in his eyes to where when he says certain things, he doesn't really mean them. He's just trying to say that to push people away. And like I said, you see this human being in Guts after you go through the Golden Age arc. So please, if you haven't, keep reading, finish The Black Swordsman, get through Golden Age, then decide if Berserk is for you. Before I reveal to you my number 1 when it comes to manga, I gotta give a couple honorable mentions, specifically My Hero Academia honorable mentions. I think that the UA Traders arc is definitely a very strong arc inside of My Hero Academia, especially inside of the Final Act saga. Simply because of the fact that nobody saw Aoyama being the traitor, and just the level of emotional impact and care that Class 1A has for one another. It's definitely better than its predecessor in the Stars and Stripes arc, because, in my opinion, she always was cannon fodder in comparison. And then there's also the Final War arc, which is currently going on. At the time of me recording the videos that I did for 2022, there was only 2 volumes of that arc, and it is still currently ongoing. So, it's currently in my honorable mentions now, but I am sure that that is subject to change depending on how much longer this goes into 2023. And then I just gotta be completely honest. Steel Ball Run is my number 1. Steel Ball Run has some of the best written characters, and I think Araki truly evolved as a writer with Steel Ball Run. It's a bit slow at the beginning, but Johnny is probably one of the best written and one of the most nuanced Joestars that we have. He is significantly better than his original counterpart in the way that he's written. Gyro, even though I knew that he was going to die simply because he's a Zeppeli, that's just kind of what happens in JoJo, especially in early JoJo. But Zeppeli too also was a very nuanced and complicated character, to where he was more than what you saw on the surface. Diego Brando. I think if you're comparing him to Part 1 Dio, Diego is a better written character. I think that Dio in the original continuity was overall better because he grew to become overall better, especially through parts 3 and 6. But if you're talking from a day one sort of ish perspective, Diego was the better written character. And then you get characters like Lucy Steele, who are also very well written. And then there's Funny Valentine, who's the most charismatic and likable villain who does awful things, but you can't help but like him because he's charismatic. And just the level of Stan's designs and creativity and the way that Araki just kind of knows that he's free from his past continuity to do whatever he pleases. Because in my opinion, a retcon isn't necessarily a bad thing. A universe reset isn't necessarily a bad thing. Araki did it specifically because he felt that he hit a creative wall and couldn't go any further, with Stone Ocean being the last thing. He felt that Stone Ocean was the pinnacle and that he couldn't go any higher without screwing anything that he did before. So, out of respect of his fans and his work, he figured that it was time to reset, especially since Araki's art style has evolved drastically over the course of JoJo. So, that's just my honest opinion. So, what exactly is it that I'm looking forward to next year? Well, for the first time ever, I'm going to be showing you guys my anime list. This time, it's kind of got a list of things that I do want to watch. It's a lot that I want to watch. But I would love for you guys to leave your comments down below on the anime side of things, of what it is that I should be watching. Right now, I've got things like Assassination Classroom, Baki, Black Clover. I've got all of these that I would love to discuss with you guys. See if any of it is worth it to you, or if I should just give up on it. On the manga side of things, I've got a very different situation. Right now, I've finished the Golden Age arc, which you guys should be receiving a video from that soon. And then I'm currently started up on Bleach because for whatever reason I could never find it again as far as watching the anime, and I don't want to watch filler. So figured the best sense would be to just start reading the manga. So you should definitely be seeing some Bleach reviews start coming out soon. And then of course, the war arc inside of My Hero is still going. And then here is the list of manga that I eventually want to start reading. Some of which I have in my collection, some of which I'm still trying to get. If you guys want to see my physical manga collection so far, let me know down in the comments below. I would love to share that with you guys to see if I've got some good starter stuff. Some things that I want to go down memory lane with, like going through the original Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. Fist of the North Star. I have yet to find and collect the other 5, 6 parts. I don't know when that will happen. Obviously, I'm waiting on part 9, JoJo Lands, baby. And I got Kingdom, Monster. I'm hoping to see if my opinions on Naruto will change if all fillers removed. So I might read some Naruto. I can read much faster than I can watch One Piece, so I might get One Piece to start reading that. I love One Punch Man, so I'll be reading that. I've got Attack on Titan, so I'll start reading that. And this is everything that's on my list as far as manga goes for everything that I'm looking forward to reading. If you guys haven't yet already, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And thank you guys so much for watching. See you guys in the next video.